So, what do you do when your team says, we don't need a daily stand up? It's a good question, right? So, why are we even having these meetings? You can just picture it, right? Some team members stared at the floor, shifting uncomfortably. One of the most vocal people in the group was a strong advocate for doing it, but seemed lost for words. People just looked at each other and it says we need to do this in the Scrum guide, so we better do it, or else we're not going to be successful. And it's one of these things where if it's part of their agile journey, how do you get them to understand that this is important and how it impacts team development? Well, if you don't have a good scrum master or agile coach, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to implore or explain why this is even something that's important, because most people look at this, I don't want to say as optional, but they look at it as an interruption to their everyday. So with that being the case, this is a defining moment in every Scrum Master's career where they have to stand up and say what's right, no pun intended, right? I often say that it should be 30 seconds per person, not to exceed 15-minute meeting, and it should be mandatory that it's done every day. My only exception is on planning days where I allow the team to say, well, we all know what we're doing today, we're all going to be in planning. And in that case, they can bypass this meeting. But the challenge comes in if you're trying to get through frustrations and get everybody synchronized, especially if you're working from home and people are in different schedules and things are happening, it's just cumbersome. And I think the bigger thing that bothers people is that it always happens at that time of the day when it's least convenient, right? It's always the least convenient time of the day. It never happens when everyone's not busy. So if you go according to what all the Agile thought leaders say, the daily stand up is a cornerstone of Agile practices. It's intended to foster alignment, communication, and rapid problem solving within teams. But what should you do when your team says they no longer need it, that they're good, that their communication's up there? So you need to figure out why they feel like they don't need this, right? And there are countless reasons why the team could object, right? There are so many misconceptions about the meeting that might hinder the team. And there's a list of myths that goes on and on and on. I know there's at least 8 or 10 myths that are out there that people say, we can't do it because of this or that or the other. And we need to find a way to squelch some of those myths. So it's important to understand the dynamics of the team, their maturity level, what they can and can't do, how they feel about what they can and can't do. You need to know those things prior to, or else it's just not going to make a whole lot of sense to go in and do that stand up. Yes? So, with that being said, let's talk for a moment about team maturity. So, understanding a team's maturity definitely is a key. It's one of the things you have to consider. A more mature team is more likely to say they don't need it. But I hear all the time people say, oh, we're just a group of individuals and we're all working on our own things and we don't care what everybody else is doing. Well, that's not really functioning as a team. The solution might be to foster more collaboration. Techniques like pair programming, limiting WIP. We can encourage people to pair together in peer review, and get them on the page where they understand that just because they're mature doesn't mean that they shouldn't work together as a team. And I think that's the kicker, right? You need to make sure they understand that when you're building a high performing team, the meeting might have lost its effectiveness at one point, but we need to do what we can to get it back to where it makes sense. And I think that if you get past the what did you do yesterday, what are you doing today, do you have any impediment scenario, and you get on board with the, we're all going to work together to solve this problem, I think that the teams can relate and it becomes a relatable meeting that's easy for them to understand the value of. And I think part of it is just, what did you commit to complete yesterday? And did you meet your commitments? What commitments do you have today? And if you have an impediment, why'd you wait so long to tell us about it? And I know that sounds kind of harsh or rigid, but if you treat it this way, what winds up happening is you end up creating a scenario where you're engaging with your team. You are getting their approval or their buy-in, but you're talking about what didn't happen and why, as opposed to what you did, even if it was irrelevant. And I think that that's the delicate balance. That's the trick. That's the secret. You need to get to that point. And I think that's something that teams don't get. So the other thing is to understand the root cause of why they really don't want to do it. And when a team starts talking, to listen to them, ask them, help me understand why you feel this is important. Help me understand what we could do to make it better, and get a conversation started. What are the problems with the meeting? What are the things we can't overcome? Why are you so opposed to this? make sure that you create a vision and a purpose for why you're doing a daily stand-up and why that meeting is important. I think that sometimes we go in and say, oh, we're just doing it because, but I think that there should be a lot more to it, right? And I've heard people say, oh, but it's the worst meeting ever. What's the worst meeting? Because you didn't do anything to make it better. So you need to take the time to experiment. Ask the team, okay, we have a vision for why we're doing this. What's the first step we need to take in order to get it done, right? Don't sit here and try to overanalyze why it's not working, or start by formulating a hypothesis. What can we do? What do we think we think we make it better if we do this, or we feel like we'd be more engaged if or when we do this. And if you can start with those hypotheses, that's going to help lead to what's going on. But before you get too hung up on Ishikawa diagrams and the 5 whys, what you need to understand is that this isn't an uncommon thing. It happens to every team. And my hope is that over time, you'll get to the point where you'll understand the value of the daily stand-up, and you'll be able to portray it to your teams in such a way that they'll see value in doing the meeting each day. That's going to do it. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you have a topic you want us to discuss, learn more at AgileDad.com. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care. Bye now.